Perfect.
Thanks, Larry. So yeah, welcome everybody to the Material Passports webinar being hosted by the Alliance for Sustainable Building Products as part of our Reuse Now campaign. So that's not a great start, my slides aren't moving. We are supported by a number of different sponsors with the Reuse Now campaign. Our patron sponsor of the ASBP and also a gold sponsor of Reuse Now is Cleveland Steel and Tubes. We're really grateful for the support that they give us overall as an organisation. But then the bronze sponsors we have are Excess Materials Exchange, Optima and Reusefully, and they help us do all the work that we do around circular economy and reuse as part of the Reuse Now campaign. So as per the information you'd have already seen, the agenda is features a lot of different organisations, industry leaders on material passports. I won't go through all their names, they'll introduce themselves as we get to their slot, but hopefully we'll have a good half an hour of Q&A at the end of the presentations. Just a bit of housekeeping, through the webinar you can add questions to the Q&A please. You're able to upvote and comment on other people's questions. Please don't use the raise hand. We can unmute the audio of attendees, so questions can be asked themselves rather than myself or Larry asking them for you, but if we're short on time, we might have to do that. If you've got any technical problems, please write a message to Larry in the chat. And just to note that we are recording this webinar. If you prefer your audio not to be recorded, then please tick send anonymously in the Q&A and we'll ask it on your behalf. Just a little bit more about the Reuse Now campaign. We kicked it off in autumn last year with the Reuse Summit, doing a lot of work around resource efficiency and obviously materials reuse to encourage the low zero carbon industries. And we're doing this through holding various different events like these webinars, stakeholder mapping, case studies, and also some deep dives, which we're due to start in the next month. Larry's going to post this survey link in the chat. We've had it open for a couple of months now. So if you're able, just have a quick look at that and complete the survey, that would be most appreciated. We'll then close it in the next few days and publish the results from that. Just a really quick overview about the ASBP. We're a not-for-profit mission-led organisation with the mission to accelerate the transformation to healthy, low-carbon built environments by championing the use of demonstrably sustainable building products. I'd really urge you to have a look at the ASBP website, not just to find out more about membership and what we're about as an organisation, but have a look at the really great resources that we have there. Something that's been downloaded a number of times is our timber insurance playbook. We've done the Disrupt research project with Innovate UK, where we've got the steel reuse toolkit, and as you can see, lots of other information there. I'd suggest you have a look. Upcoming events, we've got a natural fibre installation event later on in February, and an energy transformation event, and our Healthy Buildings annual conference, which also includes our awards at the end of February, and then another Reuse Now event in Wolverhampton on the 13th of March, which is an in-person event. Oops. And again, just giving you a bit of an overview about all the great resources and different project areas that we cover as part of the Alliance for Sustainable Building Products. It's not just about Reuse Now. We're also looking particularly at packaging, and as mentioned, steel, plastic, healthy paints and natural fibre and insulation. So on to the main event. I'd suggest that most, if not all, of the attendees on this webinar are aware that circular economy strategies and practices such as the reclamation and reuse of building materials and products are crucial to hitting carbon reduction targets. And the reuse of materials in the construction sector is still fairly limited. I think both because it's perceived to being difficult to do, but also, as I'm sure all of these guys will attest, it's actually quite challenging in practice. In part due to lack of data management and the infrastructure to support reuse at scale. And material passports is a key part of the solution to that. supporting by documenting the identity, specifications and performance of materials through their life cycle, which enables reuse decision making at the end of first life. So onto the presentations, and I will pass over now. I'll stop sharing my screen and hopefully Rachel will be able to start sharing their screen, and herself and Anna will start their presentation.
Thanks, Debbie. So my name is Rachel Hoolahan. I am an associate at ORMS Architects, and over the past few years we have been working to develop an approach for materials passporting that will accelerate material reuse. I'm joined by Dr. Ana Costa from Lancaster University, and I'll hand over to her now to make the introduction and start our presentation. Hello.
Thank you very much. Welcome to everyone. Yes, so we have been developing this project for the past year, and it's funded by AHRC. Next, please. So we would like to thank everyone that was involved on this project, and that was really important to get insights from the different stakeholders across the industry. And the main idea of this is to create a process that's clear enough to understand and simple enough, so and also cost effective, so everyone can try to implement it at at different scales on their projects, but also valuing. So the purpose of this paper is to enable the adoption of material passports and support the circular economy. And then we propose achievable guidance through templates to facilitate a comprehensive adoption of material passporting across the industry. And the idea is to accelerate material reuse in construction, promote deconstruction over demolition, increase the reuse of materials, and also increase the life cycle of those materials in the built environment. We propose 8 recommendations that go across the life cycle of a building, and we can present these in detail on the next slides. So the first one is about how we assess when we have an existing building, doing a pre-redevelopment audit to understand what are the materials that we have there and how we can identify those materials, so producing basic material passports for those. The second one is, once we have identifying those key elements, before doing a pre-demolition or pre-refurbishment audit, then we can identify exactly what are the materials that are going to be refurbished or then demolished, ideally deconstructed. And of course, in order to have a structured approach, we propose to have like a circular economy strategy that material passports can be part of that as well, and having an integrated approach. And for that is also gathering data is really important for that. So we recommend to follow also the JLA circular economy statement guidance as well. The recommendation 5, where we focus mainly on material passports and this idea of reducing material pass strategy for every project. So this can be applied at different scales if it's an existing building or a new building with different levels of details. But the main idea is making the process as natural as possible in order to inform the project, but also to accelerate material reuse. And this is a little bit of the description, but I think because we have 10 minutes, we will go into detail later. And then, of course, if we also recommend that every project should be also trying to specify existing materials, so incorporating reused materials from other buildings. We also acknowledge that may rise some extra problems, but the main idea is try to incorporate as much reused materials as possible, and so be flexible in the way we do the recommendations across the projects, to then, when the materials are sourced in construction, then they can be adjusted, because the time of the design project is quite different from when the building is constructed. So allowing that flexibility is really important. And then by the end of the project, every project should have a deconstruction plan. So we know almost how we are designing for this assembly, or we know exactly what are the materials that we have on that building in order to enable then the further reuse of those materials. And then the last recommendation is also about acknowledging that this has been developed already by different authorities, but it's important that we provide also upskilling, and we support these to be delivered across the country. So this was kind of the main diagram that we were developing across the project and understanding what are the different stages. And the main thing is, if we look at existing buildings, we will have one approach that we need to identify what are the materials that we have there, and then we can use material passports to catalog those materials and to classify, so creating those basic material passports. Then the idea is also using material passports to unlock the circular economy, and then they can also aggregate different types of information that we already use, like the EPDs, and also inform different documents that we produce, like the operational maintenance manual as well. Over to you, Rachel.
Thanks, Anna. So within the paper, we've looked at, as Anna has said, all of the ways that materials passports can accelerate reuse. And the ultimate goal of this paper is to show those overlaps. But we've also been developing the approach to materials passports from a piece of work that ORMS did a number of years ago about how we as architects could use this as a strategy to find those reuse opportunities on our projects. So the framework sits around the concept of nesting different passports. So the first passport that you might get is a material one, and then that might be within a product, system, element and function, and so on. On the top, it is aligning to Uniclass, which is a classification system that is regularly used in the UK, and which we believe is a good way of structuring the data within the passports. So this vision is showing how a building passport could ultimately hold lots of different information. There's lots of additional research work that needs to be done looking at energy passports and deconstruction plans and things like that. And we were also fortunate that the University of Sheffield were supporting by looking at some of the building passport aspects, and this has been fed into the work that's been done to date. Organising the data is really important for finding it in the future. So we've spent a lot of time, and through a working group that we've been running for the past couple of years, been working with a lot of people to understand what the best way of naming materials are. And choosing a unique identifier is beneficial because it means that when the material is released from a building, you're going to be able to identify it in the future. So developing a naming convention that's situated around Uniclass, so it can be applied to existing materials, but also new materials, was quite important. We keep making the point that materials can get passports at any point in their life cycle. So yes, it's ideal that when they're born, they get a passport, but if you come across some existing materials, it's no problem to create the passport for it at that point. And the process of creating the materials passports database is as simple as identifying the purpose of the passports, selecting a format and location for the database, and then understanding how that will be used. And this is all detailed in a handbook that we've provided as one of the appendices. We've also looked at how this process will overlay with the different RBA stages. So if you have existing buildings, obviously thinking about it very, very early on, and then starting to build your database throughout the design period so that it's actually being used as a design tool. And many questions we get are about who should be building the database. And the answer is everybody, because everybody should be thinking about these reused materials and how they can be specified into the project. The fundamental concept is of a building as materials bank, and this was something that was created by the BAM 2020 project, which was really the first time that materials passports have been articulated at a large scale. So the idea that an existing building could be seen as a Lego building, you could take it apart, salvage some materials maybe that get reused offsite, and some that get used on-site, and then your new materials may have some recycled content, and you may have some new materials at the end. And then quickly showing where the existing materials database and the proposed materials database might sit. So we are proposing that from 2025 onwards, every construction project should have materials passports as a key deliverable. This has been a huge amount of work done to date, as you can see from the graphic, and we're hoping to now bring everybody together and to work collaboratively on a future where this becomes the norm for all projects. So what needs to change from our perspective? We need to start valuing the materials. So this was a game that Anna developed throughout the year, and looking at how if a building has one life, but you can have multiple cycles, if you can increase the number of cycles, you'll extend your life in the game. So making sure that we're treasure hunting our old buildings, we're classifying them, we're going to trade them, and then we're going to explore how these can be implemented into new buildings. The recommendations in the paper and the appendices are aiming to give 2 clear deliverables, the materials passport strategy and disclosure page, which will help articulate the strategy a project is adopting to local authority. And underpinning it is a materials passport database, which again, we give guidance and soon we'll have a template for. So again, to reiterate, our recommendation is that from 2025 onwards, all projects should have materials passports as a key database. We recognise that this might mean they need to start out small, but they should focus on implementing meaningful circularity strategies. So if it's practical to maybe just passport the steel beams, for example, start there and grow the knowledge and the expertise from there. These are the appendices that we have provided. Thank you very much. Going to hand back over.
That's great. Thank you ever so much for that, both Anna and Rachel. And I think a key one there is that collaboration graphic. I think that's great that you've sort of, you know, brought everybody that's working in this space into that graphic, and the fact that I think what a slight nervousness around people that have got an awareness of materials passports and where they're sitting in the industry at the moment is potentially having obviously a number of different standards, a number of different ways of looking at it, and the industry being split, and then them not being as effective a tool as they perhaps could be. We're just going to do a quick poll for the audience, just literally 3 questions now and then 3 questions after the next session. If you could just answer the poll questions, that would be really appreciated. Thank you very much. More minutes, I can see maybe about 2/3 have answered. Nearly got countdown clock. Just another 5 seconds. If everybody can just put their answers on there, that would be great. Okay. So have you used materials passports before? Yes, 14%, no, 87%. If not, do you plan to this year? Yes, 61%, no, 40%. So hopefully that's not just wishful thinking, and everything will start really moving forward off the back of all the great work all you guys are doing. So right, to hand over then to Andrea, please. Andrea Charlson at Madaster.
Thank you very much. I think you can see my screen now.
We can, thank you.
Great. Hello, everybody. I'm Andrea Charlson. I'm the Managing Director at Madaster UK. So what is Madaster is a good place to start. Madaster is a play on words for a material cadaster. A cadaster being an official register showing the details, ownership, boundaries and value of property. And therefore, the material cadaster or Madaster is a register of the materials and products that are within our built environment. So essentially, it's a platform that helps facilitate the creation, storage and transfer of material passports at multiple levels, from a product level to an asset level, and also at a regional or geographical scale. The reason we do this is because we believe that by giving materials an identity, this enables them to be continually used in their current location and also facilitates their more easy reuse in future scenarios, and thereby facilitating this transition to a circular economy that many of us are passionate about. And ultimately, it is our vision to create a public data set based on the records that we store, and that can be used for the common good and to really facilitate the transition to industrial reuse at scale, as opposed to kind of the more project by project urban mining that we're starting to thankfully see emerge at the moment. So how does Madaster work? Everything in the Madaster platform starts with a product or material level record. Within these data sets, we can store what you would need to know about a material to facilitate its ongoing use and also its future reuse. So this can include who made it and where. It includes its circularity attributes, including any previous history of circularity, its potential detachability, and also future recovery potential, and whether that's recycling or reuse. It also captures all the other life cycle indicators that are recorded in environmental product declarations, and it also provides a store for any other documentation that would be useful. This will differ depending on what type of product you're creating a passport for. It can be a range of things from a full technical specification, there could be a fire performance certificate, or it could be the technical spec for a material air handling unit. It can contain warranties, cleaning, maintenance instructions. It can contain specific drawings if that's helpful. And it can also contain other certificates that it might be useful to capture with the product. So whether that is, for example, a cradle-to-cradle certification or other attributes that are relevant to the product. So once you've got this information, what we do within the platform is combine it with the bill of quantities for an asset to create an asset level record. So these quantities can be extracted from a BIM model, and they can also be provided through Excel. And what the platform does is it tries to match what it sees within the data set from the bill of quantities with what the product data sets are available within the platform to create a passport for the whole asset. Once that passport, that register has been created, it then can be accessible within the platform and shared to other users within the platform directly in a live kind of interactive way. But it can also be exported in a variety of other formats, such as PDF reports or Excel datasets, to enable transfer to other parties who are not using the Madaster platform. Once we've recorded all this information and created the register, you can then start to unlock a whole range of insights about the use of those products within the asset. You can start to understand where materials are located, within which layer of the structure, and the kind of total mass. This can be quite interesting for people who are responding to some other circular economy statement requirements. You know, so going to start to explore the circularity of the asset and whether that's individual kind of circular attributes such as percentage recycled content or percentage recoverable, or whether it's kind of more holistic assessments such as a circularity indicator of the whole asset, or even a detachability for the asset. And finally, you can also explore the embedded environmental impact of the asset. So because you've collated all that data, you're able to perform life cycle assessment style analyses to explore the whole life carbon of the development, or any of the other environmental indicators that the data has been captured for. So this generates the KPIs for the whole asset, which can be useful obviously for reporting at a project level. But also, very importantly, all of this information can then be aggregated again. So this can be aggregated across a portfolio of assets within an organization or even a geographic region. And once we get to this level of information, it's when you can start really unlocking that kind of urban mining at scale. What materials are in what location and when might they become available? Madaster as a platform is fairly new to the UK, so we launched in November, and we're still looking for pioneering organisations who would like to collaborate with us in a more strategic manner over the next 2 years. But we're not a new platform or a completely novel solution. So we have been developed over the past 7 years. We originated from the Netherlands in 2017. And across Europe, we have over 1,500 users and 3,000 assets already registered on the system. So we do have a lot of experience of the kind of challenges and how to overcome them in getting materials passports curated for buildings and other assets. And we also do have our first project precedent in the UK. So there was a pilot project that was undertaken in 2021 with British Land, their sustainability consultants, and their contractors, who created an as-designed material passport for the One Broadgate development. This, at the time, was awarded a BREEAM Innovation Credit, being the first large-scale use of material passports in the UK. And we're currently in discussions with the One Broadgate team about which bits of this passport they would like to update as a more as-built construction-focused passport. And also there's lots of discussions going on around how passports might be used for the fit-out elements as well, because currently it's only shell and core. So in summary, what we're trying to do as Madaster is to connect the industry through trustworthy, reliable data. We're trying to provide a central and easily accessible source that the whole value chain can engage with, that helps get the right data to the right people to enable key decisions to be made to ultimately facilitate the circular economy. Thank you very much. My contact details are here, and I look forward to the discussion in the Q&A.
Thanks, Andrea. I think it's also interesting as well with other countries starting to have more regulatory aspects around the deconstruction of buildings and the reporting of that from what materials there are potentially to be reused. Obviously, materials passports are going to play a really big part in that, because you're already going to have that information to be able to pass on and upload into those kind of systems. Can we just do the other last 3 poll questions, Larry, please? Just spend sort of a minute or 2 on these. It's just interesting. Both the ASBP and I'm sure the presenters as well. I wasn't even quite sure of the terminology to put an off-the-shelf system. I don't know if you're all going to cringe at that and say, no, ours isn't off the shelf. It's a base product that we customize, and I'm sure there's lots of that as well. But it was kind of to differentiate between sort of an Excel spreadsheet that would be done in-house or something that's more purpose built, I guess, for a materials passport. Leave that another 10 seconds or so. Still getting a few responses trickling in. If everybody can just get their answers on, then we'll just close it. Okay. So have used a system 6%, would use system 66% have used their own, 17% I would use their own version, 24%. We'll publish the other longer answers as part of the follow-up. So that's interesting. Thank you very much, everybody. So next up is Anastasia Stella from Circuland, please.
Hello, thank you, Debbie. Can you see my screen? Excellent. Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Anastasia Stella. I'm a Sustainability Associate in Waterman Group and co-founder and CEO of Circuland. So Waterman First is a multidisciplinary consultancy. We offer a range of services for structures, building services, sustainability, and environment. And Circuland is a separate company, a startup offering the Circuland platform. So in this presentation, I'll give you an overview, firstly, of the Edenica case study, which is a project that Waterman pioneered the implementation of materials passports, then the Waterman Materials Passports framework, and finally, the Circuland platform. So this is our starting point, the Edenica building, which is a commercial new development in the City of London, located here. Based on the input from the council, this is the first project in the City of London that officially adopted materials passports, which is why it was so awarded as the best net zero project by the AC in 2022. Here we can see an overview of the elements that we document in the building, which are the whole substructure, all the structural elements. That includes the core walls, the steel frame, all the floors, both precast and in situ topping, then the external wall panels and the raised access floor. We estimate that this corresponds to 80% of the building's mass. And the key materials that have been recording are in situ and precast concrete, including the reinforcement, structural steel and intumescent paint, and also the materials for the finishes. When we started the project, which was kind of a couple of years ago, we realized that we didn't have a clear guidance on how we would produce materials passports or case studies, neither suitable tools in the UK context. So we really started having a lot of basic questions like, what are materials passports exactly? What is their content, the form, where they are stored? How do we update them throughout the life cycle? This is why we started the coordination with the key contractors involved in the project. This was during the RIBA stage 4. So understanding what information we must record, what is feasible, and what is the optimal process to do so. So we then, based on the input we received, we produced this document, the employer's requirement specification document, in which we detailed exactly the scope of materials passports for the project, the application overview, implementation principles and process, and the most important, the employer's requirements. So what exactly information we need from each contractor in what format. So we have been implementing this process. It is still ongoing as the building is still under construction, as we can see here in this recent photo. So all the contractors, Kelbrey, Burn Group, Techrit and Kingspan have been providing the required information with the great support of Mace, that is the principal contractor in the project. And here I should mention that the level of information that we have been recording is quite detailed. For example, for the concrete elements, we know the exact concrete strength, concrete mix, even the certificate of the concrete mix, and the embodied carbon calculated based on it, the exact amount of reinforcement. Or for example, for the steel elements, you can choose every steel element from the model, and you can see the grade, subgrade, the supplier, the mill certificates, even the exact intumescent paint. So it's all the information that is crucial when we need firstly to reuse these elements and sell them in the future or refurbish the project in the future, and in general to understand the value of the assets. So the process has been that we collect all the information from the contractor, each contractor, which includes 3D model, datasets, and supporting evidence from on-site, including the complete materials passports templates. We have been reviewing the information to make sure that everything is correct, and then we have been importing it into the Circuland platform. Once the key process is completed, we aim to publish the case study to provide transparency on exactly what has been documented, how it has been done, and key lessons learned to support other teams on their journey. So moving now to the framework, this was a document that was published at the end of last year. It's a publicly available document that you can download. And it was an attempt to build further on the knowledge gained from Medenica and contribute to providing a standardized approach across the industry for materials passports. It was developed in collaboration with Circuit, a New Horizon program, and BRE as the Circuit project partners. And it details what are materials passports, their benefits, what are the different levels and the content for each level, links between products and buildings passports, links to BIM, so how we use BIM, and also suggested implementation process based on our experience from Medenica. As an overview, we have approached materials passports in a quite similar approach as we saw in Rachel's and Anna's presentation. So lifecycle digital documents that record information for manufacturing, construction, use, deconstruction, and then it's the same document that keeps being updated for the second, third lifecycle until it's classified as waste. And why we do this? It's firstly to enable the future reuse, but also as a great tool to collect robust data for the materials in our buildings and also to support health and safety. Here are the levels that we have identified for the materials passports, and we can see they follow a pyramid structure. And this is because the information at the higher levels results from the data aggregation from the lower levels. So at the lower levels, we have material level passport, which can be for the concrete mix or the reinforcement, then component level, which can be for the precast plank, and group component, which can be for a window or a door. And then we have the passport for each building element category, like the frame, superstructure, etc., the whole building, a complex or portfolio level, and finally, area, geographic area. And the key principle of the framework is that we only need data for the first 3 levels, where we have access to the raw data. And then for the rest of the categories, we can have them through automatic calculations. And they provide us mostly access to key statistics. In terms of the information that we include in the products in the passports, they are organized in 3 categories: design related, manufacturing related, and construction related. For example, element type, if it's a new used existing element, classification, geometry, design related, for example, can it be disassembled, what type of connections we have, and then all the manufacturing, like manufacturer, dataset certificates, expected maintenance, circularity and carbon performance, and technical specifications. And construction related, who is the contractor that constructed it on site, and data carriers. So do we have it, for example, QR code, where it is? So the structure we propose allows to have the overall passport for each element, and when available, even more detailed documentation for its material. So if this is the passport of a plank, to have the passport specifically for the concrete mix and specifically for the reinforcement. And we can get all the manufacturing related and material related information directly through the product's passports. So this aligns with the upcoming EU policy of the digital product passport, based on which from 26 or 27, all construction products within Europe will need to have products passports. And then for the rest of the information, we can directly get it from the models. So the process that we finally need to follow is to link the product's passports with the BIM by including the product passport number in the BIM models, and then through the use of software to be able to automatically produce the different levels of passports. So this is where Circuland comes. Circuland has been produced in line with the framework. So it aims to provide a technological solution to automate this whole process and eliminate the manual work. So we finally have access to all these different levels of passports, depending on what we're interested. And then the tool automatically does all the calculations for the different levels per building element category or the whole building. So finally, you have access to this information on these different levels for each material in your building, each element, all the identical elements, building element category, and whole building. So the tool has key for interconnected functions, the creation of products passports, which are used to automate the process of creating buildings passports. Then by aggregating data from the different buildings, we will produce a publicly available material stock database where to democratize data and everyone can see how different typologies of buildings perform or different types of materials. And when we have materials in the existing buildings that we no longer need, then we can send their passports into the marketplace to connect supply and demand for secondary materials. And then the same passport will be used for the new development where this material will be used. In this way, providing a holistic solution that closes the loop. So currently we are completing the product. We are coordinating with our design partners and onboarding the pioneering projects. So if you're interested in any of them, please get in touch. And closing, first of all, thank you very much. And definitely this is a very big step in our industry that requires collaboration and standardization. And it can start with a conversation. So here you can see also my both Waterman and Circuland contact details. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Anastasia. Lots of really good questions coming in. We won't get to those quite yet. I'll hand over directly now to James, please.
Thank you, everybody. Very nice to be here. I'll just share my screen for you and hopefully you'll all be able to see that. So again, thank you. Very nice to be here. Absolute pleasure. My name is James Adams. I'm from Maconda and we're a circular economy consultant that's working together with our tech partners at Upcyclear to deliver material passports. Now, what I want to talk to you about today is the role of passports as system enablers. So taking a step back from the passport itself and looking at that broader system, or in this case, ecosystem, which is really what we're describing in a circular economy context. Now, the key takeaways that I want you to consider while I'm talking is that, in our view, the point is not just to collect the passports themselves. The point is to use those passports to link together the system. Because if we want to scale and operationalize circular economy, what we need is a collaborative and holistic approach. And the Upcyclear platform is designed to reflect this system's thinking. Now, we do have some form in the area. We've been working in Europe and the UK, most recently on the 19 ORMS scheme with Multiplex, where we conducted a pilot with them. And I would encourage you to have a look at that case study. So let's describe this buildings as, or rather passports as building blocks to circular economy. What do passports do? Well, yes, it's true they carry information that makes an item easier to reuse. But crucially, they allow us to trace and influence those recovery and reuse networks in which we are connecting those passports. And this insight should inform answers to questions around the sort of data we need, what sources, how it's filtered, and how we make this data accessible. Because these can seem quite difficult and daunting to imagine, these reuse networks. It's almost like billiard balls being struck on a table and spinning off in all different directions, thousands of individual products, hundreds of sites, various states of reuse, or use rather, going off to be refabricated by dozens of manufacturers, stored, transported, finally going off to hundreds of recipients, each one with different requirements and constraints. So is the best we can do is really just give everyone information on those products and let them get on with it? Well, that's not our view. Because what we're talking about is a problem of what Warren Weaver would call organized complexity, as opposed to disorganized complexity. And in a case of organized complexity, what you have is multiple variables that are interrelated in complex, but not in a random helter-skelter fashion. There's an orderly and constrained character to all of this. And once we map and trace these variables, we can start to understand the logic of the system. And this also originates from this cradle-to-cradle certified concept of cycles with the technical and the biological cycle, and trying to emulate that natural cycle in order to unlock circular economy. So what do I mean exactly? It's all a bit theoretical now, but let's just take a look at an example of a network. Here we have a donor site, we have a recovered product, and these recovered products will interact with a series of transformers as they flow to users. And those transformers can be transport, can be remanufacturing, can be consolidation and storage spots, they can be refabricators, refurbishers, but what's important is they are flowing ultimately towards that end user who will accept a particular quality for a particular use case. And there may be a few steps, there may be a few more, there may be a few less, but once you start to map that, you start to constrain that complexity. And once you constrain that, you can understand the network, you know what questions to ask, and you can start to influence it. Because ultimately, relationships with any system, if there is a relationship between the various parts of those systems, it will start to influence the whole. So let's talk about these passport functions and talk about these key steps. And now these steps don't necessarily happen in any particular order, but they're essential to understanding that building block function. You characterize the asset, you calculate the impact, and you trace the flows. The key three things that passports enable you to do as part of that building block function. When we're talking about characterizing the asset, we're talking about inventorying the asset or the portfolio. Now, we assign passports at product level for each individual product or functional unit. You can either use the Upcycler library, we have over 10,000 digital product passports, or specific information gathered from the user about that asset. Then you're checking the impact. You're aggregating that data together, user-generated passports or passports on the library, bringing that together in order to be able to automatically assess metrics around carbon, material health, circularity, and the residual value left over for those materials. Because what you're creating is a dashboard, what we call the circular signature. And you can measure these dashboards at floor, building, or entire portfolio levels. But the idea is that you influence design decisions early, you set targets, you establish benchmarks, and you can assess performance against the delivered asset. The idea is that it is dynamic, and it needs to be dynamic. That information will keep changing along the life cycle of the build. And then finally, you're tracing the flows. That's to guide this decision making. So within the Upcycler platform, we facilitate a digital ecosystem to trace those flows. And this is assisted by both human and AI intervention. What we do is collect data on 4 key indicators to trace the impact: the avoided or accrued waste, carbon, fresh water, and whether there was a positive or negative financial income for each individual flow. The idea is to incentivize reuse by providing this reportable performance indicator to guide decision-making, because as anyone who's heard anything from business school, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So let's bring this all together now and actually look at one of these networks. And I know this might look a bit confusing here, a bit like an electrical circuitry diagram. So let's take a step back and we'll go through step by step. Let's start. We have these existing assets. They're going to be refurbed. It's a cut and carve, maybe even a demolition. You're taking the information from these assets. And because you're good and responsible, you've done your pre-demolition, your pre-refurbishment audits, you're feeding that data into the system. Once you have that data in the system, you characterize that with passport information. You give it that identity. Because once you've done that, then you can start this managed reuse process. You can start to steer those appropriate products to the needs. And those needs might be from architects, they might be from main contractors, other stakeholders, but you're connecting those needs with the available and appropriate materials. Once you've connected those needs, then you start to trace the flows. So those materials start to flow outwards, they're traced by that ecosystem function, and they go to these transformers, which, as we've discussed, could be transport, logistics, remanufacturing. And what will happen inevitably is there will be a split. You might have recycling where you have secondary raw materials, or it's a closed loop situation where a product manufacturer is recovering those products and they will go back to manufacturers who can use them. You'll also have then the reused, the refurbished products flowing on towards the new asset, and they may be with a warranty, a guarantee, whatever might be required. But what you've done at every stage is trace those flows. So how much waste did you avoid or accrue? How much CO2? And what was the financial outcome of that, positive or negative? Then you have the new products flowing back into the asset because it won't all be from reuse. And hopefully some of those new products are from those secondary materials, recycled content. And you characterize that with passports. Again, you are creating passports for that new asset where those didn't exist already. Because once you do that, as we know, you can then assess the impact. That circular signature, you can check what the impact is of that asset and start to understand those 4 metrics. And that asset then flows along its life cycle until you start again. You see how this is the system, except there's an important point here because you can skip a step now. You already have that information documented, so you can go straight to connecting that up with the needs and that managed reuse process. Now, we understand this system, but what about the signals transmitting through the system and how that can influence it? Well, supposing, for example, here at this stage, the transformers, a fabricator makes a change to their process to more easily refabricate a certain product in order to reduce their costs and capture more business. That will then update the financial report on the material flow indicator for that particular product. It will show a far more positive report. Say the client is designing or right at the start of a build for a new asset, they review the materials, the passports, and see that there's a saving to be made by recovering more of these products from their assets and reusing them on other sites. They direct the design team to adapt the design to make that particular product more recoverable, easier to recover, reducing overall costs and bringing more of that product into the market by increasing the recoverable amount. And then all of a sudden, more of that product is flowing through the system. More transformers, more fabricators take note. They also adapt their process. So you see how this signal can be transmitted through the market by capturing that information and by being able to review it at these key steps. You can influence that entire system. And a final point to note, importantly, it's both push and pull. So it's creating the passports to create the push, but also creating the demand. And we're currently working with London and a number of London authorities in order to develop a reuse hub for this urban mining, in order to generate and capture that demand. And so watch this space. We'll be able to tell you more about that very soon. Thank you, everybody. And I look forward to any questions, and you can contact me there below.
Thanks very much, James. And moving on to Jade Cohen at Qualisflow, whose presentation is going to be slightly different because, well, Jade will explain far more than me, but Jade is all part of the data supply that's required by materials passports to make them effective. I'll hand over to you.
Great, thanks for that, Debbie. Hopefully you can all see the screen on your side just coming up.
Yep, thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. So yeah, I echo what everybody else has been mentioning so far. It's a pleasure to be here. And I've been thinking in relation to some of the questions that have come in on the Q&A so far and all the other presentations we've had. And I think it's probably important to start off with in saying that within this space, it is still an evolving space at the moment. I think you're obviously hearing from each of us talk about our positions and perspectives and parts of the play in the wider ecosystem around material passporting, circularity. And it's such a wonderfully growing space. And we've obviously heard already about some of the wonderful initiatives and software policy frameworks that have been developed so far. And it's yeah, it's a fantastic space to be a part of. So I'll try to explain our position within this, as Debbie was kind of alluding to, more on the data provider side than anything else, and how that kind of fits in with that wider landscape. So just to introduce myself, I'm one of the co-founders and Chief Product Officer at Qflow, or Qualisflow. So we're a construction-based technology provider. And our kind of positioning within the circularity and material passport space is very much one of enabling the construction, building, refurbishment sites, be that big or small, to collect the data more automatically on those sites for the materials and products and other items being installed in different spaces, and then using that information to help feed other parts of this wider ecosystem around material passporting. So to share a little bit more about what this kind of looks like, this very much feeds into other visions that you've heard from the other speakers so far as well. And that when we think about mining the urban environment, it requires us to have a really good understanding of exactly what items, products, quantities, specs of materials exist in this built environment around us. And so there are so many challenges as part of this. We have the challenge of understanding the quantities of these items to begin with, where they are, where they're located, the latest status of those, any damage, other information we need to capture. We have challenges around aggregating that at the appropriate level, be that regional, international, otherwise. And we have various other challenges with regards to the logistics and the transfer of these items and the legals and warranty and other information and other barriers that prevent us from reutilizing these materials in the real world. So we've already heard about considering buildings as banks of materials, so I won't go into further detail there. But just to kind of reiterate this point around sort of where Qflow comes into this mix. So the way that the Qflow technology works is that for any building or space, whether that's an office refurbishment, whether that's an entirely new building or piece of infrastructure is being created, Qflow will be used by teams on site to take photographs of the documentation of the delivery slips of things that are arriving within that space. So by doing that, what Qflow then does in the background is we automatically extract all the information, text, the data from those documents. So we're allowing very, very simple input without as much human manual data entry as would otherwise be required. And then we're kind of mining those documents to then extract all of that useful data. What that then creates is effectively a digital record, a digital footprint of the as-built contents of that building. Of course, there are various places this can be fed into, including BIM models, other platforms and systems. And actually, you can almost replace the 3 items I've listed on the right-hand side with a series of the other platforms and systems you've heard earlier today, be that through Madaster, Circuland, or other providers in this space for managing the onwards sort of material passports or management of those materials moving forwards. The overall aim behind this, of course, is then to enable, as one piece of the wider puzzle, this grander piece around circularity. And actually coming back to the point around the frameworks for both Waterman and ORMS with the recent policy paper, I think it provides such a wonderful segue into how we can start mandating this at a more national level. So the reason we specifically at Qflow focus on the data collection piece is because during the construction phase or refurbishment phase, again, whether we're talking about a large or a small project, getting that information tends to be very, very tricky. So I used to work on site myself, so firsthand had to experience some of this pain, unfortunately, and it did require sifting through lots of documentation, emails, different communications to try and understand and type into various spreadsheets and other systems what materials had arrived on the site and when. So this wasn't a case of relying on what was designed, this is a case of relying on the evidence of what was actually delivered on site. And of course, as we all know, there can be some variations between the two there. So what we do at Qflow is, and I mentioned about taking a photograph. So the reason we've enabled site teams to take a photograph of the documentation, which might seem like a really backwards way of doing it, is because it was at the time and still remains today to be one of the easiest data capture methods to use on site, which gives us that complete consistency of all the materials and all the products that are arriving on a particular project across the supply chain, but without requiring any additional manual data entry. So that information is digitized automatically by Qflow's AI system, and then that information becomes available within our web platform. But we also make that data available for feeding into other systems. So again, there are some examples on the right-hand side here, but equally, we can start thinking about alternative platforms, such as those I mentioned earlier and others more widely within this space, where material management becomes really important, but it still needs to be fueled by as-built data from these different areas. So I wanted to highlight a particular case study recently where we did kind of dive further into this, this particular example around material passporting with a few different organisations. So BW and Bureau Happold have been working very collaboratively on an office fit-out project over recent months. And whilst the project is still being finalised, we're getting rid of a sneak preview here in terms of prior to any case studies being released. What this meant through the great efforts of the team on site was the ability for them to automatically track over 800 unique products or items being delivered into that space, automatically through taking a photograph. And what we then ended up doing was mapping what was considered priority items or priority materials with different documentation. So this becomes a bit of a mapping challenge when we have to take the evidence of the quantity of the material that's been installed and delivered with the associated documentation, such as the material specs, data sheets, EPDs, and other things. What this does create is, again, that digital bank that can then be utilised and looked at in the future for refurbishment, reutilisation purposes. And of course, coming back to the points from earlier, you've then got a whole series of other challenges yet to be solved at a wide scale around the actual reutilisation and marketplaces of transferring these goods and materials. So I wanted just to mention that as a kind of real life example. There's no quick fire win to any of these challenges that we're experiencing in the space at the moment. I think everybody is working within their own spaces and doing some fantastic pioneering work. And one of the challenges we're going to have over coming years is to really work out and nail down how, as independent advisors, architects, technology providers, contractors, anybody working within this space, how do we ensure consistency with the golden thread of data? How do we ensure consistency in our ability to actually reutilize materials at a larger scale outside of individual silos? And whilst I don't think we've got a single solution to that just yet, I think there have been some fantastic moves in this space, as you've heard from earlier today, on some of the solutions that are starting to come into this space, and hopefully work more collaboratively together to come up with some really great solutions to enabling this and moving in the right direction at the very least. So thank you for listening, and similar to everybody else, looking forward to the Q&A next.
Thanks very much, Jade. Well, I think we've had a few that have been upvoted, and Rachel's actually volunteered to take that one, so that's fantastic. So it's from Fionn. I don't know if you want to come on and ask the question, Fionn. If Larry can open your mic, or I'll just ask it maybe.
I can do, just bear with me.
Thank you.
There we go. So Fionn should be able to talk now.
Okay, or maybe I'll just ask it. So they've said, why are we not developing a national database platform for everyone to use like NBS? Why are competitors not working together on this? Would it be so much easier just to have one go-to?
An excellent question. Okay, so firstly, to come back on that, I think there is a huge amount of work to be done, particularly in the sustainability sphere. Development moves at a frightening pace. And, you know, if you look at our carbon emissions and what we need to achieve in very little time, we all need to be moving at the speed of lightning. We are architects, ORMS are architects, right? We're not here, we don't have a platform. Our approach is open source. It's meant to be scalable. We don't offer any of the sophistications that the various platform providers have mentioned. We have always been completely encouraging the approach that you're seeing today, which is effectively competitors coming on, sharing how they're approaching things and why they think one way is better over the other. We need multiple brains thinking about this. This is not an easy question to answer. We also all have our own backgrounds, our own specialties and our own experiences in different fields, and we need to be speaking together about this. So yes, we could all sit on the work that we've done to date and privately work away in the background, but I think it is much more helpful for us to be open and sharing where we're at and then starting to bring the industry together. ORMS have been running a working group on this. It is open, anyone is free to join. You just have to come into it wholeheartedly wanting to adopt materials passports, and whatever you develop, you share with the rest of the group. I'm pleased to say that everybody on the call today is actively involved in that, and we're hoping to carry that into the future so that there is operability, that interoperability that I touched on earlier between the different platforms. I don't want to see a single platform. Single platform means there is scope to have huge subscription fees in the future, and we have seen that with other platforms, including MBS. I think all of the people on the call today have something unique to offer. I think all of their platforms and their softwares and their approaches are beneficial and will appeal to different developers, different projects, different scales, different teams. What I would like to see is that the platforms can speak to each other. So if one platform provider has one client and that client sells their building to somebody else, that the data can be ported quickly and easily. So really what we're all talking about here is how we're structuring the data behind it. And that's really what the focus of our paper has been about, and our focus has been for the past few years. And that will be evolving over the coming years because there's a lot of big questions to answer. And once that is structured, then how that interface is presented can differ. And I think that that is something that actually we should be celebrating and encouraging. Now, above it all should sit a national database of some sort, or a way that all the data can get aggregated together. What that looks like, I don't know. I'm sure all of the platform providers would love to be that single answer. I still don't think that's right, but that's a question beyond my technical experience, knowledge, capability. But it is something that we touch on at the end of the policy paper and is going to be the focus of our research probably into the next couple of years. So watch this space, and if that is an area that you're interested in or you specialise in, please get in touch and offer your services. Thanks. Sorry, Jade, I think you wanted to say something there.
No, absolutely. I was just going to echo parts of what you've mentioned there completely, Rachel. And as one of the kind of providers within that ecosystem, I would say one of the things that's been really important for us, and as part of the policy paper that yourselves have published, is around the data structures, and something that we're looking at and has influenced the way that we're thinking about how we're managing data within our platform to allow that interoperability between other platforms. So I completely agree. And I think everybody on this call is already part of this ecosystem, and certainly from my side, amongst I think everybody here, it is something that everybody has a appetite to make sure that there is that interoperability to allow for data transfers, which ultimately is going to lead to the end goal which we all want, which is a more circular future. So it's been influencing for us so far, and I hope for others to move forward with as well.
Thanks both. Anastasia?
Yeah, thank you, Debbie. So I definitely echo what was been previously told, and I think we should mention also now with the UK HCBC, there is the effort to collaborate. So, I mean, so far, because it's a new area, so in order to get the expertise you need, I guess even the different organizations need to invest some time to organize thoughts and produce results. So now that there is in these spaces, I think there are the first initiatives of collaboration, and I think all of us are aligned that we need to collaborate to introduce this standardized approach. So definitely we're working towards this direction.
Thank you. So the next question that's been upvoted quite a lot is around storage, which is really interesting because we actually had a webinar in December around digital reuse hubs. And I think this comes up a lot with other roles that I'm involved in. And as I kind of alluded to in the introduction, we've kind of got a data issue, or data is a huge part of the solution, but also the actual physical infrastructure. If we can get products and materials as the supply and demand becomes much more, I think that will be part of the solution, because materials will move faster because there's more demand, but ultimately there still will need to be a middleman of some sorts providing storage, warranty, remanufacturing. And I'm sure that'll be a wide variety of organisations that will take that role on. I don't know if any of the others have got any particular comment on that storage infrastructure part.
I could add just a little bit, and I think it's also touching what James was saying. I see those sort of unmuted, and I think one of the things that passports, you know, if implemented in this very systematic way, are trying to do is demonstrate the potential future need. You know, there's a future circular potential, and you know, you can kind of start to predict the material flows and when they might be available, and it can help to start demonstrate the business case for those kind of things like storage, because just-in-time demand is only going to be achieved in a few like niche locations, and that storage is really going to unlock the more industrial circular economy. And the other thing that we're really trying to work on as well is because passports can ultimately enable that line of communication from a producer to the person who actually physically is the custodian of that stuff at any point in time, you can then also more easily facilitate a take back back to the original manufacturer or producer, and kind of, so it doesn't always have to be project to project. It can start becoming, you know, an actual material flow and revenue stream from a material producer as well. And this kind of data flow can unlock all of that.
I'd absolutely agree with you there, Andrea. And I think it's key to understand the role of the passport. It's when you collect that passport data, what's important, and particularly with the clients that we work with and speak to, what they're really interested in is how that time and effort spent on creating the passport means they can realize that value later. That might be carbon, but more often than not now, it's financial value. What can they recover from it? So if you can create, when you create that passport, connect that up to the infrastructure or the architecture that then allows you to plug into these consolidation hubs, as Debbie mentioned, these storage locations, these transport providers, these remanufacturers, transformers as we call them, then you're able to realize that value. And then you really see that circular economy start to take off.
Thank you very much. So a few questions around, and it was touched on, whose responsibility it is for supplying the information and populating it, at what stage. I know Rachel did mention about, I think particularly, ultimately, a material passport can be created at any stage, obviously ideally from the very beginning, getting more complex to develop that as time moves on. But I don't know, anybody's got any particular comment on who specifically? Should it be the manufacturer, the architect that would generally take prime responsibility? Anastasia, I'm not sure who had their hand up first, Anastasia and James.
I mean, thank you. So yeah, for the products passports, we say that manufacturers are responsible to provide information as they have the necessary data sets and information. And then for the construction process, so the actual as-built quantities and actual location of elements, etc., it's the contractors being responsible for providing this information.
I think certainly to that point about manufacturer provided passports, within the construction industry at design phase, at the specification phase with the architect, from experience, they have the greatest success at getting this information, because when a manufacturer thinks that they're about to get a product specified, win some work, that's when they're more likely to engage and provide this information. It becomes a bit harder as you go along. The contractor at, say, a PCSA period, when they're looking to identify suppliers, also has a good chance here. But I'd encourage any of you out there who are architects, designer specifiers, that's when you want to push for this. It will make the whole process easier.
And I'll add another stakeholder to reinforce everyone at all points in the project's life cycle. Like the owner of the asset really needs to be engaged in the creation of the passport, and you know, wanting it and wanting to have an ongoing like plan for how it will be managed and maintained throughout like the life cycle of that asset. If they're just doing it now to tick a box, we're only ever going to see the limited benefits of this whole passport world.
Thanks.
I think just to add, it's almost like what we are seeing in these answers is like you will get all the stakeholders involved at some point, depending on the design process and on the stage. And another thing, just to reinforce something that we were covering, is also the importance of creating material passports for the existing materials that already exist in the buildings. So then probably we'll have other stakeholders contributing to those material passports, like the people doing the pre-demolition audit, or also then the architects involved on the feasibility study as well. So you identify those materials and you create that information straight away, because then we will be able to salvage those materials and know exactly what we've got there.
Thank you. Rachel, quickly before we move on.
I'll just throw in my 2 cents worth. With all of this, there's loads of different ways you can approach it. There's loads of different debates you can have. Don't lose sight of why you're gathering the data in the first place. And this is another theme that came up through the questions. You know, how long is this going to take? How much is it going to cost? How long is a piece of string? You could spend any amount of time doing this. For each project, figure out why you're doing materials passports. If it's to try and actively reuse materials you've got on site, that will look different to the data that you will need for material reuse in the future. But fundamentally, capture any data that you have to hand. So if there's a product data sheet, drop that in the database. If there's an EPD, drop it in the database. You may not need it right now, but you might find it useful in the future. We all have a role to play in gathering the data. So like Anna has just mentioned, in terms of a reusing material, you may find an original product data sheet or a warranty or something like that, but you may need the architect's judgment or the structural engineer's judgment about what is appropriate for reuse. And they may have a due diligence process that needs to be followed. For example, some materials might need testing, other materials may not. So it's always thinking about what information is available and what information you actually need. And if you use those guiding principles, I think you won't go too wrong.
Thank you. And I think that dovetails as well into, there's a few questions there around materials degrading over time, and how would that then be reflected? And I guess I know particularly from SEAL perspective, obviously there's very stringent requirements when you're talking about load-bearing materials as opposed to potentially more aesthetic materials, obviously. So I don't know if anybody's got any particular comments on how degradation is going to be reflected in a materials passport.
I mean, I would say it depends on what point you're coming to it. So if you have a material passport 10 years ago, you know that it's, well, 10 years since. If it is an internal finish in a busy area, that material is probably going to have degraded quite a lot. If it's a really durable material in a less trafficked area, maybe it's not. I can see there's another question about how it can help with guarantees and re-warranties for MEP equipment, but with any equipment, if you can see a material is still within warranty, then arguably that's a good reason to go back to that original manufacturer and say, hi, I have this, I want to reuse it, I want to move it from position A to position B, will you honour that warranty? There really is no hard and fast rule with any of this right now. This is all evolving, it is all moving. You need to use pragmatism and you need to use your, your professional sense about what you think is practical and achievable and worth fighting for. So use it to inform the decision, make informed choices about what you may or may not reuse. You can use it to anticipate maybe what might need to be targeted or replaced, but I don't think that there will be a defined, oh, well, after 10 years, this material will be degraded to this point and therefore will need replacement. I think if we continue to take that sort of approach, we'll keep throwing out materials before their end of practical life, not just their predicted. It's like the whole argument with best before dates on food. It might be best before, but it doesn't mean that it can't be consumed after that date.
Thank you. So another question about misuse of materials passports and people putting in information, I guess, either accidentally or because they don't know the full picture and they're kind of guessing a bit, or where people are actually choosing to put the wrong information in because it's to their advantage. Any comments on how that could be avoided or checked as you go through?
Sorry, James, I jumped in front of you again. I think the on purpose thing is, I mean, as some of the questions allude to, this is something you've got to do by choice at the moment and puts a lot of effort into. And I think, on purposely creating false information is wasting a lot of people's time. I'd be surprised. I think if these are being done, as Rachel's been saying, there's different reasons to do it. If these are being done as like a deliverable, like at a handover, then those should have the same kind of quality assurance checks that you would have on any other deliverable. So that would be some kind of expert checking that they are happy with the level of quality and of the data and how it's presented. So I don't think that would actually be any different for a material passport than any other kind of deliverable that was handed over at any point in a development process.
Thanks, James.
I agree completely with Andrea there. It's your normal QA/QC processes for those, particularly those site passports which are being generated by the users. If it's coming from the manufacturer, then what we would do is just check and verify any claims the manufacturer makes. So you're not looking to punish manufacturers necessarily. You're just looking to say, okay, if they've made certain claims about the material, have they provided information? Can we confirm that? If we can't, then we're not saying it's necessarily bad. There's just an absence of that information. If we can, then we can mark it as having been verified.
And I guess the EPD process, as that grows, will help support the accuracy of information as well.
Exactly.
And also the EU standardization of digital product passports as well. Like, you know, when standards exist for any of these things, it'll be much easier to verify that they have met said standards.
Thank you. And another question that's popped up, and something that we've talked about quite a lot in Disrupt around seal reuse, is you know, it's kind of the whole VHS Betamax kind of, you know, what information you hold now, is that going to be legible, accessible in, I mean, particularly for buildings, 20, 30, 50 years time? How is kind of the material passporting system trying to future-proof itself?
I think this it comes back to a point you made earlier when we're talking about the data side of this particular challenge. There's case here around those questions around data ownership, transferability of data into different places. I think, again, without a universal system in place, which I think, as Rachel argued earlier, wouldn't necessarily be the best outcome to achieve anyway. We've got to bear in mind that whoever is owning the asset takes responsibility for the data and how the data is transferred and managed in various places moving forwards. So that there's a separate question here around if that, and forgive, I can't read the exact question that you're referring to there, but if the question is angled more at the sort of physical identification and recovery of items, and that's a separate piece there. But I think ultimately whatever strategy is put in place on a single building project or whatever, as long as the strategy is thought through in advance in terms of how that information is going to be transferred onto various parties, that's the most important thing that we can aim for at this stage. And again, it's around kind of using a sensible approach. There isn't a one size fits all in this instance, just thinking ahead. Similar to handover, I think Andrea was mentioning earlier, of any other information and assets. That's the same mentality we should be applying to this. It's not a new problem in that sense. It is information transfer.
I think a lot of it, just to chip in ahead of Anastasia and James, I think is the valorization of the inverted commas waste, because I think historically that perhaps hasn't been the driver to keep all of that information as safe and accessible as it could have done historically, because the assumption is that building's just going to be demolished and, you know, used for aggregate or landfilled or whatever it might be, whereas as we're focusing more and more around the valorization of those materials, and they're going to be worth something when that building comes down, that hopefully is going to be more of a driver to be more protective of that information. I don't see whose hand went up first. Sorry, James.
Thank you. Look, I think I see it as a loose analogy, almost the role of these kind of material deposits, similar to money. So we have a variety of financial institutions that you can put your money in. You put your money in where you think you're going to get the best return. You can transfer that money freely throughout these institutions easily, but ultimately what you're looking for is one that will maximize that return. And I see that loosely as what we might see with these platforms and with these solutions, where asset owners are going to be trying to maximize that return. Each one will have a slightly different way of doing it. But as long as this information is then able to be transported between these platforms by some kind of baseline standard, then it will be really down to the asset owner to decide where they want that information collected and stored in order to maximize that utility, be it financial, carbon, or otherwise.
Anastasia?
Yeah, so from our thoughts on this, on first of all, how we ensure we have the information, but also about the quality of information, is that after we produce the materials passports, we need someone to be owner of this information. So to have at least owners for updating this information and having annual statements to confirm that the information is there, is accurate, represent the current situation of the building. So in this way, if this could be part of the regulation that all, for example, if in the future is mandated to have materials passports, that you need an annual statement that this information is accurate and exists, I think this could provide a solution to this issue.
Thank you. We've got about 5 minutes to go. I think for the rest of the questions, if you're happy to do so as presenters, I'll send them across to you. If you can sort of add any extra comments and I can circulate that, that would be brilliant. But I did say that I would try at the end to have a bit of a summary from each of you as I guess sort of hints and tips as to how the attendees can adopt the material passports moving forward, and how they can maybe go back into their organizations and say this is something that we need to do. You know, what's kind of the key takeaway from today really for them all. I'll start with James because you're on my top left.
I thought that might be the case. Look, I think I would echo you really on this one, Debbie. It's go out in your organizations, wherever you sit within that value chain, construction or otherwise, and push for material passports. Just look to start bringing these into the projects. Not going to say use us, use any platform or anyone on here, any of the solutions that have been presented. But what's important is we start to bring that into the way the industry operates and start to impact the operating model. If we can do anything to move the needle back and create a more circular from this linear approach that we have now, then I think that's a win, just to start changing the language and changing the focus.
Thank you. Anna, you're next on my way round.
Yes, thank you. I think one of the key things is also recognizing the value of these material passports. It's not about a kind of selling a product or a kind of a new commercialization or a new, I think it's something that comes deeply from creating a circular economy and getting everyone involved and kind of recognizing that value. And of course, there are kind of ideal ways of moving forward and getting things done. But if we are not there yet, it's almost like what can every individual across the table work in order to make this happen as well.
Thank you. Rachel?
Start small and make it meaningful. Make sure that when you do something like this, you're investing in it because you believe in it and because it's actually going to help you. Don't just do it to tick a box.
Thanks. Andrea?
And I think there's so much material passports can do, and I think some of the questions show they don't do all of those things yet, but that's not a reason to not start using the data that we do have now.
Thank you. Anastasia?
Yeah, so from my side, maybe I think it's important to link it with other initiatives like Net Zero Standard and circular economy statements, policy requirements that is already part of the whole story we're already doing and the process. And I think it's super important to keep very clear the roles, the responsibilities to make this happen. If there's a clear framework, then it's feasible and it can be efficient. And we have experienced this in practice. Thank you.
Thank you. Last but not least, Jade, thank you.
I think the thing I would land on is don't be scared by material passports and the concepts around them. I think there's a lot of terminology, a lot of concepts and things to get easily into the weeds about. But if you strip all of this back, ultimately what we're all talking about is a way to have better information and infrastructure to recover materials that exist in the spaces around us. So I echo the points here around starting small. I think even if that first step is just a case of awareness raising and effectively getting a better understanding for each of us as individuals, but also the teams that any of you are working in, is probably a good starting point, and that will hopefully allow for the conversation to start around value add and what that means. So that would be my takeaway.
Thanks, Jade. Well, just in summary, I guess, thank you all very much for participating in the event today. I think by the numbers that we had originally to register, then I think we topped out at 178 that were online today. So I think that really demonstrates how important material passports are in terms of achieving a circular economy moving forward and the interest in the subject. I think to all the attendees that still remain, I'd again urge you to have a look at the ASBP website and the work that we're doing around reuse and hopefully to get more involved. And if anybody can just fill out the questionnaire, and Larry's just put the survey, sorry, Larry has just put another link on the chat. So yeah, 13:59, we've got 1 minute to go. Thank you ever so much, everybody. Have a good rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everybody.